Robert A. Hill. You know, we talk about Robert Hill for so much times. You know, we've been on this program say, well, I would have loved to get Robert Hill on this program because we use a book that the listener is familiar with, Marcus Garvey, Life and Lesson. Marcus Garvey attitude towards a government. You know, that is our favorite thing to read in the book, what a government should be. Well, we have the man who is responsible for bringing these papers to us. You know, he is responsible for also bringing volumes of papers by Marcus Garvey. I think he's the most, he has the most papers. I don't know where you get them from, but I want to say good night to Mr. Hill. Good night, sir.
Thank you, Brother Muta. Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here. Blessed.
All right, we want to start at the beginning. Oh, you get interested in Marcus Garvey?
It goes back a long time. It goes back to 1961. I was in sixth form at school at St. George's College, and the teachers in Jamaica had organized a national essay contest, and one of the names on the list of 3 topics was those 2 words, Marcus Garvey. I was 18 years old in Jamaica, never had ever heard the name of those words, Marcus Garvey. And so I just decided, why not? I would just try to find out who this man was. And I went down to the Institute of Jamaica and started to read. And I can tell you, I still can feel that the power and the emotion and the awakening that Jamaica could have produced an individual who helped to shape the world of the 20th century to such an extent. And I was an 18-year-old boy, thought I was educated, and never knew of the existence.
That was like what year? In what
1961.
Year? 1961.
And then, you know, Jamaica was just then going through the referendum, and independence was going to be in 62. And I felt then, well, what happened was I wrote the essay, and the essay won the national essay competition, and they put a little notice on the front page of the Sunday Gleaner that I had written the prize-winning essay. And a man called Mr. Eustace White, who was Mr. Garvey's secretary here in Jamaica in the 20s, he called me and asked me if I was the person who had written the essay. And I said yes. And he invited me to come down. In those days, the UNI used to meet every Sunday afternoon in the park, you know, across from where the Ministry of Finance is, going down Moresco Road.
Yes.
There used to be a little Marcus Garvey and a shrine. And he said, well, why don't you come down and meet the members? And I went there. And the singing that I heard that day, and the spiritual power and the love and the beauty of those elders. At the end of the meeting, I had driven my mother's car there, and I just said to everybody, well, who is going where? And I would, you know, give different people a ride. And they, each of them, when they were leaving, gave me a blessing and said, continue this work, man. And so in 1961, I started this.
All right, it's a George's boy.
Yeah.
Right? A George's boy, no, and we're going to put it plainly, no. Brown skin Jamaican,
yes,
no.
A brown
our brown skin George's boy get. All right, you say, you know, you get to do this essay, but you keep doing it, you know, from 1961 until now. It's years after. You're still doing it to the point where you have brought us so much volumes. That means it must have taken a lot of inquiry and, you know, in-depth study and, you know, visiting here, going there, and
a lot
figuring out what is it. You started going about it now. No, yeah, you win this essay, and you go amongst the UNIA members now. What now was the motivation now to keep you going after so much years?
Yes, well, I come from a family and a history of Jamaicans who fought for Jamaica's freedom, and I always felt that yes, I've been on this trod, but it's been rewarding because you cannot read and study about Marcus Garvey and not learn also about areas of knowledge in the world that you would never, ever have come into knowledge of. So I'm grateful to Mr. Garvey. I say he gave me an education, gave me something I never had before. So I pay tribute. He allowed me to become an educated, really, today, I consider that any education I have, I've come through the Garvey.
Can you teach at UCLA?
At UCLA, University of
How
California.
long have you been at UCLA?
27 years.
You've been teaching at UCLA for 27 years?
Yes,
so all this time I try to find you. You was at UCLA?
Yes, man.
It's long time I try to get you for this program, you know.
Really?
And I tried to find an email before even email.
Yeah.
I was trying to get you. And then I remember the last time I saw you was in Brooklyn. Yeah, we met in Brooklyn. I would take 2 pictures and everything. And then I said, I love get you for come. And I was trying to get the volume.
Yes.
I had 2 of the volumes.
Yeah.
How much volumes it is?
It's now 10, you know.
You serious?
Yes, and
so
4 more
else,
coming.
You mean after the 7?
Yes.
What else from Marcus Garvey you could have find? I mean,
well, in fact, after that 7 that you refer to, those were just the American Garvey movement. We just finished now 3 volumes on Africa, the impact of the Garvey movement all over Africa, and those are really a tremendous eye-opener. And those 2 of those 3 will be published in May coming. And then we're going to have now, the year after, 4 volumes, the Garvey movement throughout the Caribbean and Latin America. So 7 for America, 3 for Africa, 4 for the Americas.
So I would say the people don't forget the 7 volume, and you know I talk about like 20 volumes.
It's 14 volumes and then a final cumulative index volume, making it 15. And then the life and lessons.
All right. You feel if one should gather this, it's like almost like an encyclopedia of Marcus Garvey.
Yes.
You think that would be the way to go in terms of the study of Marcus Garvey, especially in the university here and the schools here? And
oh yes. I'm doing a reader for a publisher, which will be a condensed selection of all of the 14 volumes, so that somebody, say a high school student or a secondary school student, could over 1 year read systematically through and get a good grounding in Garvey. Have you
had any orders from any institution in Jamaica for these volumes?
None.
You see?
None.
All right. You see, this is really an indictment on the system right now in Jamaica, because we know about it, you know, based upon our travels, based upon our reading. And you have to tell you this. This book, Life and Lessons, is a part and parcel, and the Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey by Tony Martin publication, is a part of this program for 6 years now. We have read every part of this book except the full length of the play.
Yes.
But we have read everything in this book to the public of Jamaica, and we have also taken out of the papers.
Yes.
Also, but J. Edgar Hoover, indictment and
the
things.
repression.
Right? So I want you to know that. And why I'm saying that is because it's really weird that a son of the soil, which is you, writing about a son of the soil, which is Marcus Garvey, and has made so much impression on the international scene with these volumes. You have still not gotten an order placed by any institution in Jamaica for these volumes.
Well, maybe it's because Jamaica doesn't have a proper institution for the teaching of Garvey and Garveyism. I think that's the big problem, that we don't, well, your show has, in fact, filled that void, been a substitute. But truly speaking, the word should not depend only on this show.
On a radio program.
On a radio program.
Because you have the volumes here.
Yes. For example, there's no reason why in the national newspaper press there shouldn't be a page or a quarter page once a week. Reprinting selections. There are plenty of wonderful materials there to draw on. But the country, you have to decide what it really wants and decide whether it is good for the country. And Jamaica is still conflicted about it. It's still ambivalent, though I am grateful to see a renewed expression of consciousness emerging, and people now are gravitating to Garvey as something that has been kept from the people, and now they are taking it back, and I welcome that.
All right, I want to get back to the volumes.
Yes.
Right.
The construction of the volumes.
Tell me how you go about gathering these papers. Did you have to buy some of them, steal some of them? I mean, you know, find yourself at some position where you have to get blackmailed because of them. I mean, how you go about getting them?
No, it's nothing like that, really. When I started, I remember a man telling me, you have a nice idea, but it's not practical. And I will never forget that. You see, when I started, a lot of people didn't believe it could be done. In fact, they said it can't be done. Now, I went to America on a lecture tour in March of 1970, and while I was there, Charlene Hunter-Gault, who was then a New York Times reporter, she's now in South Africa working for CNN, she reported a story in the New York Times that this tremendous cache of Garvey materials were found in Harlem. And I was contacted, and people at the New York Public Library asked me if I could come and try to sort out this amazing massive. So these were the UNIA papers that were left in an abandoned building. And so when I started to organize those papers, I had finished my MSc thesis at the university working on what was here in Jamaica. I was now working on what was in America. And then one day it dawned upon me, why not push on and go to Europe? And so I went to Europe and discovered 1 year I traveled to England, France, Belgium, Italy, Germany.
I mean, this is in search of the Marcus Garvey papers? In search of the
Marcus Garvey papers, because they're all over.
Yeah.
And so little by little, I began now to assemble these scattered fugitive documents. And then I took them back to America, photocopied them and took them back and started to really study them. And what I was looking for was not only what they said, but the clues they contained about how they were created. And then it dawned on me that what is in Europe is just the tip of the iceberg, because, take for example, Africa. The colonialists in Africa amassed a tremendous amount of secret confidential documentation about Marcus Garvey, but only a small amount of it was sent to England or France.
Which country?
All over Africa.
All over Africa.
All over Africa. And so then I said, the next stop is Africa. So places I couldn't travel to, because in those days I didn't have no money. I was doing this out of, whatever I was earning as a teacher. So now it's like you find something and then you study it, and then a trap door open and you drop into another room, and then another trap door open.
Like an infinity thing.
Exactly. And so what was happening was like an archaeologist start digging on the surface, and then you start digging down to different layers. It was like an archaeological search. And then finally, I saw then a pattern begin to emerge and realized that now the Garvey papers existed. You see, before that, they never existed. They had to be found, located, identified, then organized, and then you were now faced with the problem, so what we're going to do with this? I was, asked to write the biography of Garvey, and I said, I think we need more information before we can embark, because I didn't just want to write something superficial. It was because I was trying to write the biography of Garvey that I said we should suspend that work in favor of recovery of the primary materials. And that is how the Garvey papers came about. But in addition to Jamaica and America, there's also the same thing in the Caribbean. I went through all of the Caribbean, the French islands, the Dutch islands, doing the same thing I did in Africa. What we now have, and this is really, I'm glad to say, what I hope to achieve. I say, don't take my word for it, Muta. You read it. You won't have to see Garveyism filtered through the eyes of this man. You have your own two eyes. Here are the documents. You read them, and you make up your mind. Now, I hope eventually, in the next 2 or 3 years, to go back to working on the biography. But right now, every man and woman is free to read these things and not have any encumbrances on them.
All right. So we have these volumes now published. We hope that after this program, ones would rally to get these books in the libraries of Jamaica and even in the universities. Because it's very important not going to the universities, the volumes that you talk about. All right, there are other books that we have published. Life and Lessons, the Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey. I was always wondering about the Tony Martin, Philosophy and Opinions, and your Philosophy and Opinions. I find that your Philosophy and Opinions is harder to get for some reason. I don't know why. Anyone has ever expressed that to you?
Actually, I think they published it, Athenaeum Publishers, and then they were bought out by a large conglomerate, and then that conglomerate was bought out. And what happens is that black books treating of black subjects, once they sell off, many times they don't reprint them. But it's something that I should really look seriously into.
So that came about? Because this is two same books published by two different people. How did that come about? Did it not have a copyright where is only one publisher can publish it? How did you go? Which one was published first, actually?
Actually, the first Philosophy and Opinions was compiled and edited by Amy Jakes Garvey in 1923. Then Garvey lost his appeal, and while he was serving his sentence in Atlanta, he told her that he wanted an expanded Philosophy and Opinions, and that then became Volume 2 of Africa for the Africans, or the Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey. So between 1923 and 1925, those are the first two volumes. Those volumes, when I began, that's for all practical purposes all that we had to go on. Then in, I think, 1965, a bookstore in Oakland, California called Marcus Books. Yes, they published Volume 2, but it was a very limited edition. Okay, then about 1968, a publisher in England, Frank Cass, who was then cashing in on the vogue for African materials, brought out a reprint of Volumes 1 and 2, but in a single book. And that was really very helpful. Then Amy Jakes and Essien Udom, a Nigerian political scientist, decided to bring out a third volume. So you had now the two volumes, Volume 2, and then a reprint of those two volumes, and then a third volume. What happened was, with the explosion of interest in black studies in the United States, a publisher by the name of Athenaeum Publishers decided to reprint a lot of classics. They call them Negro classics. And they invited Hollis Lynch, a brother from Trinidad, to write an introduction. He had written a fine biography of Edward Wilmot Blyden, the great West Indian African patriot of the 19th century. And that went out of print. Tony Martin then published his edition by his own press, the Majority Press. And then some years later, a man who had now purchased Athenaeum called me and said they wanted to reprint 3 volumes from the Negro Classics, but with new introductions. And he asked if I would do the introduction to Philosophy and Opinions. And I did. And the thing I discovered, Muta, along the way, is that it was Africans in Africa who really were the ones who mostly read the Philosophy and Opinions. If you read the introduction I wrote to that, what I show is that in America, the Philosophy and Opinions in America didn't really achieve much popularity. Its greatest popularity occurred in Africa. And I always say this.
Where in Africa?
All over Africa. South Africa, Cape Town, Johannesburg.
You know that Ghana is one of the chief
Ghana.
spots.
Yes, Nigeria.
Kwame Nkrumah time. You know, he was very influenced by
J.E. Casely Hayford, the Ghanaian patriot who paved the way for Kwame Nkrumah, he published a newspaper, and he used to excerpt it in the newspaper. And there was a newspaper in Cape Town published by James Tayile, who was the Garveyite leader in South Africa in 1924 and 25. He published a paper called African Times. And again, he used to reprint big chunks of it. I say this, you know, during the period when Garvey and his teaching went underground, is Africa it went to? Is Africa that preserved it and kept it safe so that it could re-emerge in the 60s? So we owe Africa a great debt for preserving Garvey's message.
Look at that, you know, and considering that Garvey still needs to be recognized here. And yes. All right, we're talking to Dr. Robert Hill, the editor of Life and Lessons, Marcus Garvey Life and Lessons. And several papers by Marcus Garvey. He is a teacher. He's just here, 27 years, and UCLA, it's a University College of Los Angeles.
Yes.
What you teach there?
I teach African history and African American history.
All right. When you say you teach African history, what
Pan-African history.
Okay.
Pan-African nationalism, Pan-Africanism.
Like Kwame Nkrumah.
Yes.
About Lumumba and
yes. Later on, the Italian aggression, as you know, against Ethiopia in 1935 had the same effect in galvanizing a strong spiritual
black people,
upsurge among black people all over the Western world and also in Africa. So between 1914 and 1918, that's one polarity. The second polarity is 1935-36. Those are the framing dates of really the emergence of Garvey. So what began in Jamaica as a movement aimed at progressive philanthropic reform had of necessity changed by 1918 because it now had to confront the imperialist aggressors in Africa. And that's when Mr. Garvey enunciated the Africa for the Africans, those at home and abroad program.
All right. So you said like Panama.
Yes.
And it started to branch out on a wider level.
Yes.
In New York. Jamaica coming to it? Because it would appear that Jamaica seemed to be like half track when it come on to the Marcus Garvey movement. There were more UNIA branches
in Cuba.
In even Cuba, which was a communist. Well, at the time wasn't communist.
No, yes.
Yeah, but even Cuba, there was more galvanizing of Marcus Garvey than in Jamaica. What do you think caused this?
I think it was the size and the power and the influence of the brown middle class in Jamaica. They really tried to shut out the voice of Garvey. Garvey was very upsetting, as he said, when he started here in Jamaica. He ran into a wall of opposition because he said no one wanted to be called a Negro. He said that. No one in Jamaica wanted to be called a Negro. To them, that was an insult. So, unlike the rest of the Caribbean countries, the middle class, the brown middle class in Jamaica is very, very strong relative, say, to places elsewhere in the Caribbean. Garvey in the United States, on the other hand, galvanized, between 1912 and 1916, 1917, you had 50,000 people from the West Indies leave and migrate to the United States. There was a huge migration, and when they got to America, they tried to enlist to fight in the British Army, and the British Army rejected West Indians as officers and as people worthy to fight in the British Army. And it was a huge shock to these well-educated West Indians who had gone to America. And again, Marcus Garvey said that was one of the agencies that really helped the UNIA, because it confirmed what the UNIA was saying. All right, so now Garvey, the war ends in 1918, and then Garvey now announces the Black Star Line in April of 1919. And that is when the thing took off. It's as if the symbol of this ship just sent an electric current, man, through the whole world, all up and down Central America, Eastern Caribbean, Africa, Jamaica. Everybody was kind of enthused about this. So what you find happen is that Garvey now had a product which could move even without him being there, or a representative being there. It's something that you could buy into and support and endorse. It's like a man or a woman today make a record, and they don't have to go to a trace and perform. They can play the record and while you sleeping. Okay, so it was the shares, the stock certificate and shares in the Black Star Line that managed to spread the word of the movement. Now, the Europeans suddenly woke up in 1919 to the realization that these Africans now were not joking. They wanted to take back Africa from the usurpers. The usurpers, who are the Europeans, who had gone into Africa and usurped African territory and culture. Mr. Garvey gave focus to growing dissatisfaction all over Africa, all over the Caribbean. The Garvey movement then became a platform or a banner under which myriad kinds of discontented people could now give focus and expression to what their hopes and aspirations were, their vision. I like to say that Garvey and Garveyism represents not simply a man but a space into which and through which many currents and streams gathered force by coming into this expansive movement. And if you look, by the way, at the preamble of the Constitution of the UNIA, Garvey said this is an expansive movement. He said that in July of 1918.
You think this is where the fire started to come down and gather from, like, maybe the Jewish community or the white community in America? They're seeing now that here's a black man now, you know, bringing so much different aspect of the black, you know, Central America, South America and things together. You think this is where now that fire started, the cause of the fire?
I am glad you asked that question, because after many, many years of studying and reading and reflecting, I have come to this conclusion, and it's only mine. I offer it then in that spirit of humility. Speaking in Pittsburgh in September of 1919, Garvey, in a speech, said, "We," and I'm quoting now, "we have served the white races for a long time, and now we are going to work for ourselves." That was the thing that really brought down the fire on him. It's like Garvey said, "I'm tired of working for white people. My father, my grandfather, my grandmother, from I know myself, we've been working for white people." And he said, "You know, it's time we work for ourselves." As Elaine Melbourne here in Jamaica said to me the other day, in a nutshell, what Mr. Garvey was saying was, get up off the ground. Get up off the ground, man. See? That, to me, is what brought down the fire. I don't think Garvey himself really understood the powerful ramifications of what that caused. Because in America, for a black person to say he will no longer serve the needs of white people is a very, very threatening thing. And they couldn't tolerate that. They had to silence him. They had to try to clam him up and break the enthusiasm that was growing clearly for his movement. So between white supremacist sentiment in America that couldn't tolerate a black man saying, just like what Rosa Parks did say, you know, when she was in the bus, when them say, get up out to the seat. And she said, you know, I'm tired. I'm tired of getting up for white people. The same message, and that, look what that galvanized in 1955.
1 year. One year of strike.
Yeah, where they said refuse to take any buses in Montgomery. And that then gave rise to the modern civil rights movement. And everything then, black power, everything that came after. But that woman, Rosa Parks, she was not making any grandiose statement, you know, she just said...
And she wasn't into no black struggle and things. She was just saying, this thing kind of get ridiculous after a while.
And I'm not giving up my seat. That was the equivalent of Garvey saying, we're tired of working for white people, it's time we work for ourselves. And that plus the imperialist fear and anxiety created by Africa for the Africans, that was the name of the Garvey movement in Africa, you know. Garvey and Africa for the Africans were synonymous. And in fact, Africa for the Africans is not Garvey's original term. It comes out of Africa. And so when the Africans saw Garvey, they recognized him for what he really represented, because they understood. Africa for the Africans goes back a long way in Africa. So the imperial...
Explain that. Because you really have credited Marcus Garvey with that. Africa for Africa.
Yes. It has a genealogy that goes back, in my own researches, to 1858. 1858 is the earliest expression of that term when it was coined. It was coined by two Nigerian young men who had originated in Sierra Leone, and they had gone to England to learn the cotton trade, because what they wanted to do was to develop a kind of commerce that would help to divert Africa away from continuing vulnerability to the slave trade. So they went to England, to Manchester, England, and they were working with a man called, his name is going to come to me now. They were working with him, and he wrote a letter in which he said, I'm glad to have these African apprentices, and they feel that it will further the cause of Africa for the Africans. That's the birth
of that saying.
Now, it would then continue strongly after 1885 with the partitioning of Africa. Black people in the West began to now use that phrase as a way of reacting against the European scramble and partitioning of Africa. Edward Wilmot Blyden used a similar phrase called Africa for Africans. And then in 1897, a black man from Malawi, what was then Nyasaland, called John Chilembwe, was a young student, and his mentor, a European, a very radical European man who always was being slammed hard by the colonialists. He took John Chilembwe and put him in school at Morgan State University in Virginia. And this man, his name is Joseph Booth, published a book called Africa for Africans. And then that's all from when? That's 1897. His book was called Africa for Africans. And then it began to develop around 1905 as a result of the Maji Maji rebellion in East Africa. You find Africans and those that they call Ethiopianists in South Africa starting to use that phrase, Africa for the Africans. But because by then the AME Church from America had come into South Africa and started a very strong movement at the end of the Anglo-Boer War, or the South African War as they call it. So by 1905, 1906, there was all over Africa a consciousness of this concept, this dream of an Africa for the Africans. In many ways, they paved the way for Garvey so that when he stepped forward and stepped up with his movement, people didn't have to scratch their head and ask, what is this?
Talking about,
and knew immediately. This is something that, but this is the underground, you see. This is something that had been, and we must never forget that there is an underground knowledge system that African peoples have retained. This is how we have survived.
All right. This is a good time to bring in this. We're talking now about Garvey's influence.
Yes.
Who would you credit for influencing Garvey more than anyone else?
Yes, brother, this is a very interesting subject too. I've just been finding out a lot about this too. Have you ever heard about a person named Love? Yes, Dr. J. Robert Love.
Robert Love.
A Bahamian doctor who had been trained in America in this and had gone to Haiti as Episcopalian missionary. Dr. J. Robert Love came to Jamaica, I guess around 1895, and started publishing a newspaper called the Jamaica Advocate. And he's really the first black man to be represented in the old colonial legislature. He won the seat for St. Andrew. He was a fantastic elocutionist and orator. And they tell me, the old people in St. Anne's Bay that I interviewed tell me that Garvey used to walk and sell a newspaper, the Jamaica Advocate. So it's like he was, as a youth, a distributor of Dr. Love's paper. And in a letter, Garvey wrote and said explicitly that this was a man who had a great influence on him. When Dr. Love died in 1914, Garvey organized probably the only major memorial meeting to honor his memory. And several people spoke. Garvey was not the main speaker. A man called Reverend T. Gordon Somers, a very famous Baptist preacher, Jamaican, was the main speaker. So J. Robert Love was certainly an important influence. Booker T. Washington was also an influence.
What was Robert Love actually saying? I mean, why was he such an influence? What was he saying to...
Well, Robert Love was a Pan-Africanist, you see.
Okay.
In 1900, right after the first London, England. The organizer of it and the secretary of the African Association that organized it, Henry Sylvester Williams, he came to Jamaica on a lecture tour, and J. Robert Love, the person who advertised his meetings, organized his meetings, and introduced him to here in Jamaica. J. Robert Love was also a great teacher of the history of the Haitian Revolution, in particular the life of Toussaint Louverture. He used to write a lot of editorials about the importance of black people learning the history of the Haitian Revolution. And he wrote very eloquent articles about Toussaint Louverture. But moreover, he was a man who not only had a philosophy of African nationality and Pan-African nationality, but he was a model at a time when you didn't have black models to kind of look to. And so his ability to speak and he was also, you know, the organizer of the convention movement in Spanish Town. He, every 1st of August, initiated a large convention in Spanish Town to bring people together to discuss affairs of the day. And this convention movement had it was like a staging ground, a demonstration site for a lot of young, aspiring Jamaicans. So he, plus his newspaper, was very literate and very well edited.
Wow. This is very ironic. I'm speaking to you, listening to you, and I mean, I have just been like the hearing that this man existed, but I've not really gotten any information on the man. Is there any volume of the paper that you bring out that address this man?
Yes, there's a lengthy annotation, a biographical annotation in Volume 1. In the appendix to Volume 1, you will see a lengthy biographical essay on the life of J. Robert Love. There is someone at the University of the West Indies who also wrote a PhD dissertation. It's in the library at the University of the West Indies. It's the main source for anyone wanting to study
about Dr. Love.
Dr. Love. It's in the university library.
Yeah, we're talking to Dr. Robert Hill, editor of Life and Lessons, and also volumes of papers on our first national hero, Marcus Garvey. This is a part of our, you know, trying to bring to light this great man, this work that has been done by this great man, by all the people them who we have seen over the years, have published, edited, or even bring to light anything about Marcus Garvey. You know, Marcus Garvey write in this book, as I say, one of our main features in this book is to read about Marcus Garvey's idea of the ideal state and what Marcus Garvey feel you should do if the leader of the state or any of his members of his government should slip up. He should be put to death, and also his family should be held accountable for all of these things. What do you think about that? Looking back on what Marcus Garvey is saying now, what do you think about that philosophy, you know?
Well, you see, Marcus Garvey wrote that while he was in the Atlanta Penitentiary, and I know when he wrote it. He wrote it after he asked Amy Jakes Garvey, his wife, to get him a book by the great Greek philosopher Aristotle called The Politics. And that book she brought to him, and he read it. In fact, what Garvey wrote on governing the ideal state is a kind of gloss on Aristotle. A lot of those ideas are already sketched out in Aristotle. It's an example of how Garvey tried to go back to certain fundamental sources in order to find out, well, where have we been, where have we come from, where are we going? Now, what you've described is an accurate reading given the fact that a leader who usurps the power of state, such as the colonialists come into your country and they usurp your land, they usurp your minerals, they usurp your labor, and they also usurp your culture, and then tell you you don't have any. No, you have to get that back, okay? That's the moment that Garvey is writing about. We are confronted with a set of usurpers. You have to overthrow that. So that it is a very specific affirmation of what black people had to do if you were to regain your freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the fact that having regained a kind of flag independence, we find that the process of usurpation is continuing, but in a different guise. But usurpation, nonetheless, means that if you're not careful, you're going to push people back to that same corner again.
So the relevance of that, no. You think that it could be, all right, for me, I read it and feel that I would vote for a government if they would really agree with that, because I see it as relevant. When we're talking to Robert Hill, as I was saying about Garvey's idea of an ideal state, and I was saying that, you know, when we read it, we read it in the context of now. In that Marcus Garvey is saying now, all right, a prime minister should be held accountable for all what he has attained in government, and his wife should be also held accountable. I feel that it is even more relevant now, considering the situation that we find ourselves in. What I'm asking you is, how would you see it in light of what is happening now and in relationship to now? If you see that there should be some alteration to it, or it can be just taken as a blueprint, or would you see it?
Yeah, I wish I could comment on that, Brother Muta, but I haven't lived here in Jamaica. I come on periodic visits. Say all of the things that have been building up in the last, since the gas demonstrations or riots, whatever we call them. I haven't been here. So I'm kind of just here since last week, and I'm bombarded with a lot of developments, and I have to ask people, well, who is this this name Tisona? I never even heard that name before. I never hear about that man. So I'm just really trying to get caught up, as it were. But I think I get the sense of your question. The problem is usurpation, and if you're confronted, any people is confronted by rulers who are usurping the rights of the people they govern and engaging in forms of corruption, then you create a crisis of representation. You create a crisis, a profound crisis in the society. Then I think the way is clear. You have to adopt some pretty drastic means to redress that. But whether the situation has reached that point, I can't say.
Well, I tell you, it passed that point. I tell you that. So it passed that point now. You know, it reached a stage now where some of them steps they really have to take. You know, people have to be held accountable from 1938. You know, when the two political parties start them devastation on the Jamaican side. Marcus Garvey emphasized reading.
Yes.
Very important. Marcus Garvey will say, if you sit down at a bus stop and you wait for a bus, you know, find something to read. You know, that's very important.
I can give you examples of that very concretely. When I interviewed a man who worked with Garvey at the government printing office, because when Garvey first came to Kingston as a little sort of young printer, he worked at P.A. Benjamin, the couscous place, and then he also worked at the government printery. And the man I interviewed told me that during the lunch break, you know, the printers would, you know, go and eat, or they would go and play ball, like some cricket thing, and or they would stand up and talk. And they said, Mr. Garvey wouldn't participate in those things. He always had a book reading during his lunch hour. And then I interviewed a niece of his in St. Anne, and she said that her mother, Garvey's cousin, told her when she was a little child that Garvey was always in the practice that if he's walking on the street and he see a piece of paper with writing on it, he fold it up and put it in his pocket and wait till he get home and read it. But he wouldn't pass anything that had writing on it. And, you know, he became completely invested in the word. And in any shape or form, but particularly reading and literacy, that to him was the means by which he could get out of the predicament of young people in a colonial society.
I have found that what reading has done for me, you see, it has allowed me to draw from things that I have read, to reason to people who would not normally want to recognize what I am saying. You know, in other words, because I have read, I can, when I'm reasoning with someone, I can say something in my own word, but it is based off putting together something that I have read, you know, and it has carried me really. You know, I recommend reading a lot, and this is the next part of the book that we keep reading on the program, you know. Marcus Garvey, attitudes towards reading. Why is it that Marcus Garvey was so adamant against the Jews?
Well, it went through different phases. When Garvey left St. Anne's Bay, it was a Jewish man who helped him to leave St. Anne's Bay, a man called Michael Solomon. He was the custos of St. Anne's Bay. He took an interest in Garvey, and when Garvey came to Kingston, the man who owned P.A. Benjamin, a Jewish Jamaican family, he also took an interest in Garvey. I should point out that it was the Benjamin family that owned the property at Edelweiss Park. And when Garvey came back from America in 27 and tried to find and establish his headquarters, it's the Benjamin family he went to, and they gave him, you know, allowed him to buy the property. Edelweiss Park belonged to that same Benjamin family. Garvey was in many ways the recipient of a good deal of patronage from the Jewish community here in Jamaica. The de Cordovas at the Gleaner. When Garvey went to America, we found that he had a letter of reference or recommendation from Michael de Cordova, saying, I know this young man, he's very energetic, he's a well-disposed individual. Garvey had no problems by the time he left Jamaica in 1916. Garvey's, I'm writing a book, in fact, called Lion Zion, Marcus Garvey and the Jews. The story begins to get complicated in 1921. In 1921, the Black Star Line ran into a problem, and a man called Orr, O-R-R, sued Garvey. Garvey, the case was heard by a Jewish socialist judge. The judge found for the litigant, Orr, against the Black Star Line, but overstepped his bounds by saying that this man Garvey should be locked up. If the evidence presented to him is what it is, this man Garvey is a menace. Okay. Garvey then reacted very, very strongly to Jewish Zionists or Jewish socialists presuming to tell black people who their leaders should be. Now, the story gets more complicated in 1922 because after Garvey, while on a visit to the South, had this meeting with the head of the Ku Klux Klan, Garvey was, you know, severely chastised and rebuked.
Went to visit there.
Yes, by the integrationist wing of the black movement in America, mainly the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, at the head of which was W.B. Du Bois. Garvey was now thrown onto the defensive because he had to justify why he would meet with the head of an organization that targeted blacks, Jews, and Catholics. Now very alarmed. And then in 1923, when Garvey is tried on the charges, the trumped-up charges of mail fraud, the prosecutor is Jewish, the judge is Jewish, and the judge told Garvey, because Garvey now announced that he was taking over his own defense. He had fired his defense lawyer, a man called MacDougall. Garvey took over his defense, and the judge told him, Mr. Garvey, I have to be in Europe for a meeting of the International Jewish Congress, because the judge was the president of the American Zionist Congress. Garvey, at the same time, had given $25,000 of UNIA money to a Jewish shipbroker, and had, in 1921, come to Jamaica and Central America on a fundraising tour, but thought that the $25,000 was being spent to acquire the SS Phyllis Wheatley, which was going to be the ship for the transatlantic African route. Garvey came back to America and found that only $12,000 of this money could be accounted for, and the Jewish shipbroker was not refunding the the full 25,000. My feeling is then that Garvey was not, in principle, an anti-Semite, but Garvey was on the receiving end of a great deal of organized Jewish criticism and opposition. His reaction was sometimes giving as good as he got. I think that when Garvey comes back to Jamaica, you see him shifting back away from this aggressive...
so how did that affect his relationship with the Jews here, after that? How did it affect the relationship here?
The fact is that he came back to Jamaica and became... he was able to purchase Edelweiss Park from the Benjamin family.
This is after?
After all of this. He comes back to Jamaica, and Louis Ashenine becomes his champion, and the man who almost went to prison for Garvey. He's Ashenine from the Gleaner Company. Many Jamaican Jews were very well disposed to Garvey while he's here in 27 to 35. In fact, many Jews felt that what Garvey was calling for Africa for the Africans was not at all unlike their own hopes and aspirations for a Jewish Palestine. They said that Garvey himself was a Zionist, merely that he was a black Zionist. He was looking for a homeland for black people, as they were looking for a homeland for the Jewish people. Now, when Hitler came to power in 1933, Garvey started publishing The Black Man the same year that Hitler rose to power. And you will see in The Black Man, I was able to find all of the scattered issues of The Black Man, and I will try to get a copy of that for you, because it's the complete set of Garvey's final writings and speeches from 1933 to 1939. So he leaves Jamaica in 1935, goes to Europe, and you see him discussing at length the importance of Hitler's rise. What he is saying at that time is that the Jews had a lot of the blame for what had happened to them in Germany, that they had not taken heed of the need to build an independent homeland. He also said that they were partly responsible for Hitler's anti-Semitism because they had only worshipped money. Their financial power, he said, they made the mistake in thinking that money would save them. Now, when you put all of this together, where do you come out? It's a very mixed bag. There is no simple conclusion. Garvey had periods when he had intense conflict with Jews, but then it's balanced by periods when he was supported by Jews. So I'm trying to write this book in order to just say, let's look at the complete record and not just take the view that all Jews were opposed to Garvey or that Garvey was opposed to all Jews. It's a little bit more nuanced, a little bit more complicated than that. I don't know if that helps.
Well, it's just that, you know, we've been reading this, you know, part of it is talking about his resentment for Jews. Where it's one of the things he says is that never trust a Jew.
Yes.
Don't let him know that. He's playing the odds against you all the time.
Yes.
He plays with loaded dice. His card is marked. You can never win against him.
Yes.
Make this a secret whispering propaganda in every community where you go into a Negro home.
Yes.
Whisper all the time that the Jew is bad. Flatter him as he flatters you. Robs you. Never gives you a square deal because he's never going to give you one. But tell him how much you love and how kind and nice his people are. Get all you can from him and give him nothing back except good words and pleasant smiles. This is his policy. The policy of the Jew is if he sees a Gentile dying on the pathway and a penny covers his eyes as a hope for a recovery. What is it? What is the, for me? What is it saying? Maybe politically, Garvey in Jamaica was using by based upon what he's saying here, that get all you can from them, but know that they are what they are. Or would you see that?
Yes, I'm glad you read that.
Because you speak about the Benjamins and Eloise Park.
Yes.
From what I'm gathering here, maybe Garvey is such a political. He's
being a diplomat.
He's saying
diplomacy.
Yeah. Well, them is here and them have the thing. So if I need it and them have it, I need to get it from them. But it's not that I love them. It's just that I need to get it from them. Or you'd see that interpretation.
Yes. You see, what Garvey says and what Garvey does is not always identical. And you're right. That's a very extreme statement of feelings of antipathy, negative feelings of antipathy towards Jews. But at the same time, the man who led the reception for Garvey's return to Jamaica, who agitated when it seemed like the government might exclude him after he was deported, was Corkford Simpson. Simpson was a Jew. Garvey comes back to Jamaica, and Simpson becomes really the main figure besides Garvey in the organization of the first political party in Jamaica, the PPP. This was Garvey's contribution to Jamaican politics. So then you have to ask yourself, is Garvey being a hypocrite? Is Garvey just being just playing policy, engaging in policy? Is he being a diplomat? Garvey.
What I am reading here is I mean, I can't go against what he's saying here. He's saying that whisper all the time that the Jew is bad, flatter him as he flatters you, right? Never give him a square deal because he's never going to give you one. But tell him how much you love and how kind and nice his people are. What am I gathering here? Based upon what you're saying and from what I'm reading here is that Garvey is almost like he's closing one eye and opening the next eye. He's saying, all right, these people have what it is necessary for me to go through. But I am going to really look on them with one eye, knowing that, you know, they are for themselves, but since they have what I want, I will play along with this thing, you know, as a reference point to get what I want.
Well, you know something, Brother Muta, Garvey took a lot of heat. When Garvey left Jamaica, he was almost a broken man. And one of the reasons why he was at such a low ebb is that he had, in 1935, the general election of 1935, Garvey switched sides and changed support Louis Ashenine was running now. Yes, it was Louis Ashenine running against Corkford Simpson for the St. Andrew seat.
This was the Gleaner one.
Yes, yes. And Garvey refused to support. No, he refused to support Simpson, and he threw his support to Ashenine.
Right.
Now, Garvey was roundly abused by people in Jamaica for supporting Ashenine. In a sense, Garvey's political statement or political action and the political statement that you read there are at variance. So you have to, I would say this, view the context. The statement you read comes from the school of his lectures in African philosophy, which he wrote for the School of African Philosophy, which he taught in Toronto, Canada in 1937. You have to think in terms of the rise of the anti-Semitism of Nazi Germany, of the period after Garvey goes to Europe, 1935, and the escalation of anti-Jewish sentiment, not only in Germany, but in England, in Italy, in France. The tide was running so heavy against the Jews. Garvey, I think, was exposed to that, and what he is doing is in fact recycling a lot of popular feelings against Jews. Now, does that mean that if he were presented with an opportunity, he would not do business with them? He's saying, in fact, engage in a whispering campaign, help to keep people vigilant about Jewish power, but you have to work with them. Well, Garvey never lived long enough to have known about the Holocaust, and therefore the interesting question, I think, would be, what would Garvey have said if he had become aware of what would start to happen to the Jewish people in 1940 and 41? I think that from everything that I could see, Garvey would have come out strongly against the extermination, any kind of extermination of the Jews. In fact, Garvey warned Hitler in 1938. He wrote in an editorial, which is why I want to send you that, black man. He said, Hitler is going too far. In fact, he said Hitler's psychosis about the Jews is going to get him into trouble, because he said, never underestimate the power of Jewish capital, which in a sense has a slight overtone of kind of anti-Jewish stereotyping. But he warned Hitler. So the question we're left with is, yes, he did say that, but did his actions, or to be more precise...
Well, it's not telling me that Garvey is saying that he wouldn't have communication with the Jews. This is not what the statement is saying. The statement is saying that even though you are doing these things with the Jews, but know that they are for themselves. They are just doing it for just doing it, but it's not because they are loving you.
Yes.
So he's not directly saying that you must deal with them. He's just saying beware of these people as a group.
Okay.